Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We've got this great source material you sent over, quite a stack actually. And today, we're jumping into something really fascinating.
Yeah, this idea is pretty ambitious.
It is. Can we find a single framework, a unifying way to understand systems, not just physics systems, but, well, everything?
Like a standard model, but broader, across the board, from particles right up to, societies.
Exactly. And the main source we're digging into today is A Standard Model for Systems by William L. Weaver. He puts forward his own model, basically his personal way of thinking about all this.
That's right. And it's a framework he's apparently used a lot, especially in teaching, which I find interesting.
And it's not built in a vacuum, is it? He's standing on the shoulders of giants, really.
Oh, absolutely. It's grounded in general systems theory, GST, and also systems thinking, that more practical approach. He's offering a structure.
A structure, yeah. A
Yeah.
way to maybe organize all this knowledge, help people, especially students, make sense of it all.
hmm So our mission today is to really unpack Weaver's model. We want to get at the philosophical ideas underneath it all
Pull out the key concepts, the important bits.
and explain them in a way that's clear, accessible, so it actually sticks with you, the listener.
Okay, let's unpack this. So maybe before we dive right into Weaver's specific model, we should touch on the ground it grew out of: general systems theory, GST, and systems thinking.
Good idea. Yeah, you have to understand the context. Why did GST even pop up?
What was the problem it was trying to solve?
Well, back in the mid-20th century, science was getting incredibly good at one thing: breaking stuff down. Reductionism.
Right, taking things apart to see how they worked. Physics looked at atoms, chemistry at molecules.
Exactly. But there was this growing feeling, this frustration that you were missing something crucial. You couldn't understand a living cell or an ecosystem or even a business just by looking at the isolated pieces.
Because the important stuff happened in the interactions.
Precisely. New properties emerged from how the parts related to each other. Reductionism just wasn't cutting it for complex stuff.
So GST was sort of pushing back against that, saying, look at the whole picture, the relationships.
That's the heart of it. People like von Bertalanffy started looking for principles that applied across different kinds of systems, common patterns. And the source we're looking at highlights a few key GST ideas that Weaver builds on. First up, holism.
Ah, the classic. The whole is more than the sum of its parts.
Right. But it's not just more like adding things up. It's that fundamentally new things, emergent properties, appear because of the interactions. Like wetness isn't in one H2O molecule.
It comes from lots of them interacting. And related is open systems.
Oh, absolutely critical. Most systems we care about aren't sealed off like in a textbook diagram. They're open. They're constantly swapping things with their surroundings.
And the source is specific about what they swap.
Yeah. Energy, material, and information. E, M, and I. This flow, this exchange is what keeps them going, lets them adapt, grow, prevents them from just winding down.
Which naturally leads to thinking about how those flows create dynamics, interconnectedness, and feedback.
Because everything's linked,
Well,
right?
yeah.
You poke one part of the web, and the whole thing can vibrate. And feedback loops are just fundamental.
Like a thermostat. Negative feedback for stability.
Exactly. Or positive feedback, like runaway growth, compound interest, that kind of thing. Systems use feedback constantly to regulate themselves or to change.
GST also emphasizes hierarchy, doesn't it?
It does. Complex systems rarely seem to be just flat structures. They're nested. Think subsystems within larger supersystems.
Like organelles in a cell, cells in a tissue, tissues in an organ.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
And Kenneth Boulding, another big name in GST, actually formalized this, creating levels of complexity. That idea is really important for Weaver's model later on.
And underlying all this was the hunt for common patterns, right? Isomorphism.
That's the big hope of GST, yeah. Can we find principles that work in, say, an electronic circuit and in an economic market or in a biological cell?
If you find those common rules, you can transfer knowledge between fields.
Exactly. Build a more unified picture.
And systems thinking is just putting these ideas into practice.
Pretty much. It's the mindset, the methodology. Training yourself to see the connections, the loops, the patterns, not just the isolated events.
Considering different viewpoints, maybe, and how our own assumptions shape what we see.
Definitely. Recognizing our own mental models. In a way, Weaver's framework is him laying out his mental model for systems based on these GST principles and trying to teach it.
Okay, great foundation. So, grounded in GST and systems thinking, let's get into Weaver's specific map. He kicks it off with what he calls the foundational trinity.
Right, this is the absolute base layer of his model. He argues that fundamentally everything in reality can be described in terms of three core components: energy, material, and information.
EM and I again.
EM and I. And he uses this neat analogy to help visualize how they combine the RGB color model: red, green, blue.
Okay, so energy is red.
Energy E is red. It's the most fundamental. Capacity for work, motion, change. Think physics forces, fields, thermodynamics. It's the ultimate driver.
And green is material.
Material,
Yeah.
matter, stuff, atoms, molecules, planets, chairs. But here's a key point Weaver makes, borrowing from physics.
EMC.
Exactly. Material isn't seen as totally separate from energy. It emerges from energy. It's energy bound up, configured in stable ways, condensed energy, basically. That's chemistry's domain.
Which leaves blue for information.
Information. This is about order, pattern, structure, arrangement. It's communication, computation, meaning. It emerges when energy and material are arranged in specific, non-random ways.
So like the sequence in DNA or the code in software.
Precisely. Or the structure of a crystal, the syntax of a language. This brings in information science, math, logic, computer science, even fields dealing with meaning and communication.
He talks about this EM-AI progression. Is that just a handy sequence, or is it meant to be more fundamental?
He presents it as more fundamental, representing actual, verifiable levels of how complexity builds up in the universe.
Yeah.
Stable matter, M, forming from fundamental energy, is physics.
Right.
And then meaningful patterns and structures, I, arising from specific arrangements of both E and M.
Yeah.
That seems to be how things work. It's not just conceptual. It reflects a sort of cosmic layering.
And this EMI trinity ties straight back to those GST principles we talked about.
Oh, completely. It defines what flows in open systems: energy, material, information.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect example of emergence right at the foundation. M emerges from E. I emerges from E and M configurations.
Like mixing those red, green, and blue lights to get all the other colors.
Exactly. The interplay creates the whole spectrum of reality systems.
Okay, so we have the EMI foundation. Building on that, Weaver adds the second big piece, a hierarchy of complexity.
Yeah, this is where he maps out different kinds of systems in the sciences that study them. It's organized by increasing complexity and, crucially, by the new properties that emerge at each level. Three main tiers.
Tier 1 sounds like the basics. Foundational sciences.
Pretty much. This tier is about the fundamental rules of how E, M, and I interact. Physics, chemistry. Systems here are often, though not always, more predictable.
And he links this to Boulding's simpler levels.
Right. Like Boulding's frameworks, static things, clockworks, simple predictable dynamics,
Yeah.
and maybe basic control mechanisms or thermostats. It's the ground rules of the universe.
Then we jump up to Tier 2, life sciences.
And this is a huge leap in complexity. Life emerges. Systems here are fundamentally open, constantly doing that EMI exchange. They maintain themselves, that idea of autopoiesis.
Self-building, self-repairing.
Yeah. Plus metabolism, complex feedback for homeostasis, adaptation, reproduction, guided by complex information like DNA. It's a whole new game.
This maps to Boulding's cell, plant, animal level.
Exactly. Biological principles of organization, information processing, self-regulation, they become dominant here. Things physics and chemistry alone can't fully explain.
And finally, Tier 3, social sciences and humanities. The human level.
This is where things get even more complex, arguably. Human self-consciousness emerges. Language, abstract thought, intricate social structures, culture, values, ethics.
Boulding's highest levels. The individual, human, social organizations, maybe even transcendental systems like philosophy or art.
That's the mapping. And Weaver, or rather the source describing his model, really flags one thing as the key differentiator here.
Choice.
Choice. As in free will, intention.
As in conscious intent, deliberation, values driving action. Human systems aren't just reacting based on fixed rules or instincts in the same way. There's purpose, meaning deliberate decision-making involved. That adds a whole other layer of complexity and, frankly, unpredictability.
So the hierarchy isn't just a catalog, it's showing how new rules, new qualities emerge and become important as you go up.
That's exactly it. It's a map of emergence, how the basic EMI rules allow for life self-organization, which then provides the basis for consciousness, culture, and intentional action.
Okay, so we've got the GST roots, the EMI building blocks, the hierarchy map. How does Weaver suggest we use this model? What's the practical payoff? The source mentions academia quite a bit.
Yes, he seems very focused on its utility there, both for structuring research and, maybe even more so, for educating students in a world that feels increasingly fragmented.
How does it help with research?
It gives researchers a common lens. When tackling a problem, you can ask, where does the system sit in the hierarchy? What are the key EMI flows? What principles are likely dominant? Are there insights from other tiers?
Ah, looking for those isomorphisms again. Like control theory from Tier 1 applied to social dynamics in Tier 3.
Exactly. It prompts you to look for those cross-level analogies. And it encourages thinking holistically, considering the system's environment, its inputs and outputs, how it connects to systems above and below it.
But you said the educational side seems really key for Weaver.
That definitely comes through strongly in the source. He sees it as a powerful tool to combat the information overload students face. It provides conceptual scaffolding. Scaffolding. Like a mental structure to hang knowledge on.
Precisely. A map of reality showing how subjects connect, how physics relates to chemistry, how both inform biology, how information concepts run through everything. It counters that feeling of subjects being totally separate silos.
Answers the why do I need to learn this question.
Kind of, yeah, by showing where it fits in the bigger picture of understanding systems.
And it must make that idea of emergence less mysterious.
It makes it more concrete, less like magic. Seeing the hierarchy helps students grasp that life or consciousness aren't just tacked on. They rise from the complex organization at lower levels. It's a solid argument against overly simplistic reductionism.
So it's not just about facts, it's about teaching a way of thinking.
That seems to be the goal. Focusing on these transferable principles, EMI flows, feedback, hierarchy, the role of choice builds adaptable thinking. Students learn to approach any new system by asking these foundational questions.
What are the EMI bits? Where does it sit in the hierarchy? What loops matter? Is choice a factor?
Right. It equips them to analyze unfamiliar problems more effectively, drawing on core principles rather than just domain-specific knowledge.
Which fosters that interdisciplinary fluency everyone says we need for today's big problems.
Absolutely. Things like climate change or AI safety. You can't tackle them from just one discipline. You need people who can think across physics, biology, computer science, social science, ethics. This framework is designed to cultivate that kind of thinking.
So it sounds like it goes beyond just understanding. It's about enabling action, empowering students.
That's a strong theme, yeah. Intellectual agency.
Yeah.
The idea isn't just to train people to work within existing systems, but to give them the tools to critically evaluate those systems.
To understand their dynamics, see the leverage points.
And potentially design better ones, or at least participate more effectively in debates about them. The source uses the AI arms race example, understanding the EMI involved, the complexity levels, and crucially, the human choices shaping it. That's key for agency.
He does add a note of caution, though, doesn't he?
Yes, importantly. He stresses it's a model, a lens, a guide to appreciate emergence. It's not claiming to be the final theory of everything that completely explains away mysteries like the subjective nature of consciousness.
It helps you see that it emerges, but maybe not the full how or why of subjective experience itself.
Exactly. It's a map, not necessarily the entire territory explained.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. The basics of general systems theory, Weaver's specific model with its EMI trinity, and the three-tiered hierarchy of complexity, and its uses, particularly in education.
It really boils down to having a potential framework, doesn't it? A coherent way to think about the sheer complexity out there, moving from isolated facts towards seeing the connections, the patterns.
Seeing how physics links to chemistry, to life, to human society and thought, all underpinned by flows of energy, material, and information.
And ultimately aimed at fostering a deeper understanding and perhaps more empowered action, what the source calls intellectual agency.
So here's something for you, the listener, to chew on. How does this idea, this picture of nested systems built from EMI, rising through levels of complexity, and finally involving human choice, how does that change how you look at the world?
Yeah, think about a system you deal with regularly. Your commute, your workplace dynamics, maybe a community project, even a piece of tech you use.
Could you apply this lens? Think about the EMI flows. Where does it sit in the hierarchy? What are the feedback loops? What role does choice, individual or collective, play?
Does seeing it that way offer any new insights, maybe reveal different ways it could work? It's definitely food for thought.
Absolutely, a lot to reflect on there.